citizens of the internet, let's talk about NPR. So if you pay attention to the news or Twitter, you probably saw that liberal Satan, Elon Musk, the evil guy who makes the cars that rich people drive that don't take gas, has done it again. He has upset the quote-unquote left in America, the fake left, the people who think they're left because they watch MSNBC or listen to NPR, frankly. What happened basically is he labeled NPR as state-funded media. The criminality of that. How dare he? First of all, we'll get into how literally all U.S. media is state-funded media. NPR, CNN, MSNBC, Fox. It's all state propaganda. But NPR especially is funded by the government directly. And the people that are freaking out about this and clutching their pearls like it's not, are hilarious, including NPR. So NPR basically came out today and said, hey, we're leaving Twitter because Elon correctly labeled us as state-funded media. Here's what their statement says. NPR's organizational accounts will no longer be active on Twitter because the platform is taking actions that undermine our credibility by falsely implying that we are not editorially independent. We are not putting our journalism on platforms that have demonstrated an interest in undermining our credibility. So how is he falsely implying that they're not editorial independent? They're state-funded. And we'll get into the reality of that in just a second. But he's not implying anything. They put Russian funded on RT. They put Chinese funded on the Chinese funded stations. They put, I think it's UAE government funded on Al Jazeera. NPR is a government funded it's called public broadcasting. Anyway. So they're saying we are not putting our journalism on platforms that have demonstrated an interest in undermining our credibility and the public's understanding of our editorial independence. We're turning away from Twitter, but not from our audiences and communities. There are plenty of ways to stay connected and keep up with NPR's news, music, and cultural content. So I was reading that in the voice of the typical NPR broadcaster and listener. So, here... Elon put on, and it says government-funded media. That's the label that exists on NPR's Twitter account now. Government-funded media. Okay, well, how much truth is that? NPR quits Twitter after being falsely... Here's the headline from NPR. NPR quits Twitter after being falsely labeled as state-affiliated media. It says government-funded media. Maybe he broke to that when they complained. But let's go into this. So here's NPR's official financial statement from their own website for 2019. And it says year ended September 30th. The amount of funding from the CPB, which is the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, which is how the government funds public broadcasting. They threw grants through the CPB. All right. So here's their budget for 2020. $2,633,292. For 2021, $8,109,017 from the CPB. And that's like we said, the Corporation for Public Broadcasting that the government funds public broadcasting through. And federal agencies, $84,000 in 2021 and $374,949 in 2020. Sorry, 84,500. So that's from their own financial statements. They're getting millions of dollars from the government, from grants and federal agencies. And the federal agencies, it's hundreds of thousands. The stuff that they're getting from federal agencies directly is hundreds of thousands, but they're getting millions of dollars worth of government funding. So the idea that they can sit and throw a tantrum and be self-righteous about being labeled as state-affiliated media says a lot. It tells you a lot about their biases and how disgusting and fake these companies are. So a lot of people don't know this either. And I only know this because I got curious a couple years ago when I used to listen to Morning Becomes Eclectic with my ex-wife in the car. And they would do these, they would say, NPR is made possible. And this is the voice they use. NPR is made possible by a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. We also by possible by sponsors like BP, Chevron, Pfizer. So they were announcing, this was in the Obama era, that they were also taking sponsorship. So NPR, not only are they government funded, they also take sponsorship money, right? So the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, right? How does that work? So the Corporation for Public Broadcasting is an American publicly funded nonprofit corporation created in 1967 to promote and help support public broadcasting. Corporation's mission is to ensure universal access to non-commercial high-quality content and telecommunications. Listen, I support this. We should spend tax money on it. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting was created on November 7th when U.S. President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Public Broadcasting Act of 1967. So on SourceWatch, this is how the section on National Public Radio reads. The intro paragraph says, National Public Radio is a national nonprofit media outlet created and funded by the federal government. So government-funded media is what NPR is, like it or not. And the idea is not to discredit, it doesn't discredit their sources, but it gives people the know to when you listen to NPR, you know that. You have to go into it knowing, hey, they're funded by the government. So anyone is going to have biases. Any station, any broadcaster, myself included, has biases. It's human nature. We are biased towards the things that we understand and relate to, and that's just human nature. And so the idea that putting this label on NPR discredits them somehow, get over yourselves. Oh my God. What this continues to do, and what you can see so clearly with Twitter, is Elon's he's not perfect. Don't get me wrong. He's definitely censored people that he shouldn't, but he's much, much better than any of the other platforms or networks. He's allowing for free speech, and he's correctly labeling entities like NPR as what they are. If you're going to have to label RT and these other Al Jazeera as government-funded entities from their respective countries, then it's only fair that you label NPR as government-funded, because it is. And this pearl clutching is how ridiculous of a person do you have to be be upset about this? Anyway, so another thing I wanted to touch on here is, NPR is obviously donation funded. So one of the big donors to NPR is the Kroc widow, and this is well known, who is the McDonald's heiress. Her husband Ray Kroc is who built the McDonald's empire. And so she donated tons of money to NPR. Good for her. But do you hear critical stories about McDonald's and NPR and factory farming and that kind of stuff? I don't know. Maybe you do. I don't listen to NPR, especially lately. But you see what I'm getting at here, right? There's conflicts of interests with media, and NPR used to be above that, but they started accepting corporate donations, and now they're not. Now they're not above that. Now they're not critical of pharma. Now they're not critical of, because they'll lose their donations. They'll lose their sponsors if they, and that's the problem with media. How can you be? That's why independent media is so much better than MSNBC or CNN or any of the main networks, because they're all beholden to ad money, and so they don't do journalism; they do advertising. And NPR is no different. And then also George Soros And I was one of those people who thought, oh, you crazy wing nut in your Soros conspiracy theories. But I'll be damned, Soros does fund a lot of stuff. And it's something, you know, I'm not saying that it's for the bad or the good. I don't know that much about Soros, to be honest. I've heard a lot of conspiracy people talk about him, and I've heard rumors about him, but I've never really studied him personally. So I don't want to say anything about Soros. I don't know whether his influences are good or bad, but he has influence. You know, if you're donating money, and Bill Gates does the same thing. When you donate money to media companies, you have influence over them. You're giving them money to hire people and pay bills. So just as an example of that, this is an article from back in November of 2022, facing dip in sponsorship on income, NPR cuts back on hiring. To my point, when you take corporate money, you're beholden to corporate interests. And so this idea that NPR is some unbiased, fair, down the middle station is ridiculous. It's not, and you just have to, it doesn't mean that they don't do good work. They do a lot of great work. And I used to love listening to Ira Glass and, what's that show called? Wow, the podcast was so good. But NPR has a ton, the point is NPR has a ton of great programming. And Ira Glass was the guy who worked with the ACLU. They did a whole movie about defending Nazis, defending free speech. So I'm a fan. But again, the pearl clutching over NPR being labeled what they are is ridiculous. So now I want to take a dive into something that's very interesting because all roads tend to lead back to this. The Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. Now, it doesn't specifically mention NPR, but it talks a lot about the BBG, and the CEO of the BBG back when the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act was passed in 2012, 2013, was a guy named John Lansing. Well, John Lansing is now the CEO of NPR. And I found these articles in digging that I thought were so interesting because they talk about the Smith-Mundt repeal, and they were worried about this when Trump came in. During the Obama years, they worked with the State Department to build this propaganda machine, and they assumed it was going to be handed off to Hillary Clinton, and then Trump won the election. And so there are literal panic articles, which I'll put links to in the description, where they're talking about this. Hey, we built this propaganda arm, and now Trump's going to get it. Oh my God, what are we going to do? Well, they spent 4 years using the propaganda arm to defame him as a Russian spy. But there's proof that he used the propaganda arm in ways, to his benefit during his tenure, or his administration did at least, So here's an interesting one. This article is from NPR, and it says, an Obama-backed change at Voice of America has Trump critics worried. A new law is raising concern that the journalistic independence of Voice of America and other federal broadcasters could be compromised by a future White House eager to market itself abroad. The federally funded Voice of America and its affiliated broadcasters such as Radio Marty, Radio Free Europe, etc., intended to provide reliable news reports in multiple languages to countries that lack a viable independent media and to promote democratic values abroad. So VOA has always been our propaganda arm, abroad. And this article is from December 14th, 2016, right as Trump was elected. The new law strips away the presidentially appointed bipartisan Broadcasting Board of Governors, the BBG. The broadcasters instead would answer to a chief executive nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate, which is Lansing. The Obama administration embraced the change promoted by congressional Republicans before the November elections. It passed earlier this month by the Republican-controlled House and Senate as part of a much larger and essentially unrelated bill, which awaits Obama's signature or veto. And that's what they do. They hide these provisions in bills so no one knows about them. And that's what the Smith-Mundt modernization was. The board was intended to insulate the broadcasters and journalists from political interference, but management by part-time, non-resident board members proved unwieldy. Last year, the board appointed former Scripps executive John Lansing as CEO. with day-to-day responsibilities. The new law's formation of the structural shift to an advisory board with a CEO directly appointed by the president was seen as a way to ensure the broadcasters could function more smoothly. But the election of Donald Trump, whose attitude towards the press veers widely depending on the favorability of the treatment he receives, has left some supporters of the venerable broadcaster worried. Critics such as Democratic board member Michael Kempner charged that the Obama administration and Congress are handing Trump new propaganda tools with a vast international reach that Biden is using now. For decades, international U.S. broadcasters were not allowed to present their programs to the United States, but the ban was lifted in 2013, accentuating the concerns of what a Trump administration might bring. Congress unwittingly just gave President-elect Trump unchecked control of all U.S. media outlets, Kempner told Politico. No president, either Democrat or Republican, should have that kind of control. It's a public jewel. Its independence is what makes it credible. The Washington Post editorial board suggesting Trump would appoint the head of Breitbart News as the broadcasting CEO wrote, if Congress's intention was for U.S. broadcasting to rival the Kremlin's, it may well get its wish. So here is the media, here's NPR, basically telling you in 2016, hey, the government created a vast propaganda arm, and now Trump's going to have it. In the past, the promise of journalistic independence could be found in the firewall, preventing meddling by political figures. The U.S. Secretary of State sits on the 9-member Broadcasting Board of Governors, or assigns someone to do so by dint of his or her position. So Hillary Clinton would have controlled this, or the Secretary of State, whoever she appointed as Secretary of State, which would have been probably, I don't know. Mike Pompeo controlled it during Trump's era, though, so that tells you a lot. Wasn't he Secretary of State and Rex Tillerson? A spokesman for the board said in a statement to NPR, the legislation makes no charge of the statutory protections afforded for federal broadcasters. The CEO is now legally required to abide by and oversee the firewall. The spokesman said it's the job of the news directors, editors to Okay, so Amanda Bennett, director of the nearly 75-year-old Voice of America, says journalists in her newsroom take great pride in that promise. I really value this as neutral, credible objectives, non-political news organizations, and I want to make sure we do everything possible to keep it that way, Bennett tells NPR. I presume everybody. So, yeah, just on their word, we can expect them to do what's right. I'm sure you believe that. So here's another article about it from Politico. Trump to inherit state-run TV network with expanded reach. And this one has an interesting bit where they talk about, let's see, President-elect Donald Trump. Okay, I don't want to read the whole article for you. President-elect Donald Trump is about to inherit a newly empowered Voice of America that some officials fear could serve as an unfettered propaganda arm for the former reality TV star who has flirted for years with launching his own network. Buried on page 1404 of the National Defense Authorization Act that passed last week is a provision that would disband the bipartisan Broadcasting Board of Governors, the independent U.S. agency that includes Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, all these networks. The move, pushed by the House Foreign Affairs Committee chairman, is a way to streamline the agency. It concentrates control into a powerful CEO who is appointed by the president. That change, combined with the 2013 legislative revision that allows the network to legally reach a U.S. audience, the Smith Modernization Act, which was once banned, could pave the way for Trump-approved content created by the U.S. diplomacy arm if he chooses to exploit the opportunity. Essentially, Trump is finally getting his Trump TV financed by taxpayers to the tune of $800 million per year, and some of the few people in the know aren't happy about it. Congress unwittingly just gave President-elect Trump unchecked control of all U.S. media outlets, said Michael Kempner, a Democratic member of the board who was appointed by President Barack Obama and was a Hillary Clinton donor. Right there. That's who was supposed to get in and have control of this. And here they are tripping out because Trump got control of it. And now Biden has control of it, which is why, the Twitter files are terrible and everything is Russian propaganda. Officials in particular fear that Trump and his allies could change the agency's posture toward Russia, considering how Trump has expressed a positive view of President Vladimir Putin. So there you go. This shows you like the world of propaganda that we live in. Here's these people boviating about Trump having access to the propaganda arm that they created so they could gin up a war with Russia. Multiple media outlets in the BBG family aim to counter Russian propaganda, including Current Time, which was introduced 2 years ago and broadcasts in Russia according to the NPR model. There's a part of... So a BBG CEO... Because of the modification of the Smith-Mundt Act in 2013, the BBG can now broadcast in the U.S. too, but the influence on the domestic market could be even more subtle, the Republican official warned. A BBG CEO influenced by the administration could penetrate established media outlets with packages, series, or other news products produced by the BBG's networks, but picked up and aired by traditional media like Fox News or Breitbart. Many U.S. outlets currently use content from VOA. Interesting. No money would even change hands. You've had no effect on the budget, the official said, but it will denigrate the product. The official added, it's extremely troubling. It's going to be bad for U.S. international broadcasters and their credibility. In a sign of how significant the changes are, Hillary Clinton's transition team set up a meeting to visit the studios at 330 Independence Avenue the Wednesday after the election, according to two sources. The meeting was canceled after her loss, however, and the Trump transition team has not visited the studios. There's always a risk with any federal agency, whether this administration or another, they're going to use the organization in a partisan way. So the rest of the article is them kind of downplaying the influence that they have. But they already told you what's going on here. So there's this woman, Jennifer Greigel, who I did a piece on earlier, or I used some of her reporting in a piece earlier. She's a very well-studied propaganda expert. And I did a piece about the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act. But I wanted to close with this piece right here, because this is an article called Unmasking Uncle Sam, a large test for defining and identifying state media. And this is crazy. This is what I wanted to close on. So in December, Edward Royce, chair of the Republican of California, chair of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, published a comprehensive oversight investigation report, the Royce Report, regarding violations of federal law by U.S. state media outlets. This report detailed U.S. state media violations, and not only RFE-RI, but also by Voice of America, the flagship U.S. state media outlet. The Royce Report concluded that the USAGM outlets and VOA violated federal law at least 860 times from 2016 to 2018 by intentionally and negligently targeting Americans with social media advertisements. The New York Times article, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee inquiry, and the Royce Report provide valuable insight into the prevalence of domestic U.S. state media, but even with this information, it remains difficult to ascertain the true extent of domestic U.S. state media activity, because there are few legal restrictions under either statutory or common law that require the U.S. government to attribute their programming or disclose their distribution methods. Perhaps more concerning, there are no meaningful legal consequences when the U.S. government is found to have committed a violation. With massive resources and inherent incentives to promote its policies, the U.S. government could exert enormous power over free public discourse if left unchecked and unmonitored. Effective oversight is inhibited by the absence of a generally accepted test for defining and identifying U.S. state media. Without such guidance, government supervisory agencies and independent media companies alike cannot consistently identify, regulate, or manage state media. This is particularly so in the modern media climate, where state media can arise in print, radio, television, and television broadcasts, and the internet and social media, and can emanate from the government itself and from ostensibly independent individuals and organizations. So it's a mess out there, people. And NPR is state-funded media, like it or not, and everything has the potential to be state. In the new world we live in, Everything is state media. Everything could be state media. Even media you think isn't, and this proves it. So, stay safe out there.